Record. Mute myself.
All right. Thanks, May, and everyone else that was involved in putting this series together and inviting me to spend some time with you all. I have got a bunch of slides, and just going to spend a short time reintroducing myself here. I work at the UW-Madison um, and at a center called the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, which is kind of a mouthful. We were created back in the late 1980s as a sustainable ag research and outreach unit. At the time, sustainable was too controversial, and so we ended up with this rather long, somewhat cryptic name. I've been there since I was a graduate student, working primarily with specialty crop growers and primarily with vegetable growers. And my position at the university after I graduated was intentionally designed by me to be part-time. So I work at the university part-time. And then for a bunch of years, um, I used the bit of my time that wasn't at the university to start my own farm. And then after that, I started a business called Small Farm Works. So I was doing, I had three vocations, and three is too many. So I eventually cut it back to two, the two that you see here. I'm no longer farming. And we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about tools. There's a little parade that I created. I have an official title at the university, but it doesn't really tell you what I do. So I call myself a farm viability specialist. For a lot of years, I ran beginning grower schools. The first one I started was the Wisconsin School for Beginning Market Growers, which taught people who were interested to be in becoming small scale vegetable producers. And then, as May also mentioned, I've been involved in creating what we call Compass tools. Compass tools are decision support tools that are meant to help a producer understand their cost of production and their profitability in different aspects of their farm, both in terms of crops and in terms of market channels. I'm going to mention those tools briefly at the end of this. There's a brief reference to my farm that I no longer do. Was a small scale farm, although kind of an oddity in the world of small scale farming, in that I was almost exclusively selling wholesale. And for a short time, I was part of this project to create hot sauce. And this hot sauce with my picture on it was sold in Whole Food stores across the country. This is kind of what I want to cover, not necessarily in this order. I'm going to give a little bit of a preamble and some context and thoughts on small scale farming and farm scale, talk about some myths and realities, talk about tools and equipment in the context of farm development, specifically in terms of strategies and goals, talk about some tools to help with business planning and capitalization. In almost all my presentations, I end with the 4 foolproof steps to farm business success. And anyone that knows me knows that I like to have fun. And so if I'm not having fun, I'm not very happy. So I've injected hopefully some fun bits through this presentation. I have spent most of my career working with vegetable producers and was a vegetable producer for about 12 or 15 years myself. So most of my examples are going to be related to vegetable growing. I have been doing work with livestock producers more recently, but I don't have a lot of anecdotes and stories to tell about livestock production. So apologies to those who are livestock producers, but some of the principles and things most of what I talk about is going to be applicable. I'm just not going to have any examples to share for you. Many years ago, I was on a market farming listserv that no longer exists anymore. And there was a discussion on the listserv about basically kind of how many acres do you need to have in vegetable production to make a living? And a person posted this statement. To me, the whole thing comes down to this: what is the right scale for my operation? The challenge is to find a size that represents a good fit for a grower's management skills. And that kind of sums up my work in this area to a T, thinking about scale and profitability. But I think this sentence, while provocative, could be changed because it's not just about size. You can have a very small farm that's extremely diversified, and that diversification can make it super difficult to manage. And so it's not just about the size of your operation, it's about crop diversity, market diversity. And it's also not just about having a good fit with your management skills. You also need to find a size and a diversity of operations or enterprises that are a good fit for your quality of life goals and your income needs. So the red words can be interchanged, and the black underlined words could be interchanged to make this a little bit even more provocative to think about. So some context, which is not necessarily fun to hear. This chart only goes to 2004, but it tracks off-farm income of farm households and farm earnings from farm households. And then you have the black line, which is in total income for U.S. households. And I guess the good news is that farm households are kind of following that line. But of course, the main reason that they're following that line is because of off-farm income. This is a little bit more updated from 2015. This chart shows farm income and off-farm income and total farm income at different scales based on how much sales are happening. And you see that farms with sales less than 10,000, which account for about 48% of farms in the US, their farm income is actually a subtraction from total household income. There is a little red bit below the zero line there. It's hard to see, but it's there. So the main message here is that virtually all farms in our country have off-farm income. Many small-scale producers really depend on it. So that's kind of a reality in terms of what we're working with as small-scale producers. And then we have this more recent report from PASA, where they did a study of direct market vegetable farms. And their main question was, can direct market vegetable farms make a middle-class living? And this is from their executive summary. Only approximately 25% of farms in our study were able to achieve net incomes at or above the median Pennsylvania household income of about $57,000. Most farms' net incomes were less than half of this. So sorry to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. Because the reality is that it is possible, and the possibilities are many. And while the deck might be stacked against us, there are ways to make it work. And one of those ways is to be really intentional about planning and about following your plan. This is a slide from when I present to beginning farmers, and I don't know how many people in the audience are in that beginning farmer category, but this is kind of a basic farm planning sequence that I encourage people to think about and to follow. And the first is to think about what your income and lifestyle goals are. And that might just be you as an individual. It also might be you and your household and your family. The next step is to think about what are you passionate about in terms of starting a farm business. And after that, the next step is to determine at what scale of operation and that enterprise that you're passionate about will meet your goals in terms of income and quality of life. After that, If we determine a scale of operation, then we can begin looking at what required investment there is, what kind of infrastructure do you need, what kind of equipment and facilities are going to be required. And we all know that farming is a lot of hard work. At this scale of operation, with this set of tools and equipment and infrastructure, are you going to be able to do all the work yourself, or are you going to need to become an employer? And perhaps the biggest question to think about is, do you have all the skills needed, or will you need help in terms of certain aspects of running the business? So this is what I'm going to be spending some time, hopefully having some fun with you all as we go through this presentation. In addition to being really passionate about farm tools, I also am a sports fan. Anybody recognize the March Madness bracket here? This is a version of the bracket that I made in 2017 with farm tools instead of basketball teams. And what I did was I posted this. I had people vote on the different matchups. And then we created a new set of matchups based on the winners of those. And then we eventually came down with the farm community's favorite tool based out of all these 64. We whittled the 64 down to our ultimate favorite. So I'm going to use this and interject the results of this Market Farm Madness tournament that I created back in 2017. We've been doing it annually since then with some different themes that I can tell you about if there's time at the end. So why do we buy equipment? Well, there are some quantifiable reasons. Big ones are reducing the cost of producing, harvesting, or packing. And one of the biggest ways to reduce cost is reduce labor costs. Labor is typically 50 or maybe even 60% of costs on a vegetable farm. That's including the owner. Not including the owner, it can be 30 to 45%. Another quantifiable reason is to increase revenue by producing and selling more, either with the same unit cost or ideally with reduced unit costs because of the first item. Another reason to buy equipment is to increase quality and consistency of what's sold, thus increasing revenue. And then a reason that a lot of farmers lean into, and maybe lean into for questionable reasons, is to shield income from tax, which is a reason of debatable worth. There are also subjective reasons that are less easy to quantify for purchasing equipment. One is to relieve pain and suffering, either our own or our hired workers or our family members. And then there's a really big reason why some of us fall into a trap of buying equipment. It's just because we love farm tools and we want to buy them. So, given all of that, what are some goals, priorities, and decisions what are some goals and priorities that we can use to begin making decisions about what equipment to buy? I think it's really important to set goals for your business and use them when you're making decisions in terms of a piece of equipment. So you basically gauge the purchase of a new equipment as to whether it's really fitting with your plan that you created. Of course, plans evolve and change over time, and that's certainly an acceptable thing to do, is to change your plans over time. It's almost guaranteed that it's going to change. So you need to carefully consider the purchase of anything based on a set of questions. And this is a starting point. You may have additional questions to ask. The big one is, does it fit within the context of your plan? Does it fit your scale? And perhaps most importantly, does it fit the scale that you want to reach? It's sometimes necessary to buy what might be called stepping stone tools that you use for a while and then grow out of. But to the extent possible, it's generally a better plan to save and acquire things that are going to be with you for an extended period of time that fit with your plan. You need to think about where that thing is going to live on your farm? Do you have space to keep it? I know a lot of farms just have their lineup on the edge of the field and keep things outside. I'm a big fan of keeping good care of machinery and equipment. So I was delighted when I bought my farm and it had a big equipment shed. And you think about what it costs, and not just what it costs, but what it costs to operate. And then it's also good to think about resale value, especially for some of those stepping stone equipment that you might feel the need to purchase. Is it durable? Can you repair it yourself? Is it easy to use? Is it enjoyable to use? Can others use it? The can others use it is really key, especially if you're thinking about eventually having employees. Is it sustainable? And a big question is, do you really need it, or do you just want it? And that can be an important check on our equipment buying proclivities. In terms of setting priorities and making decisions, I think it's a good idea to identify bottlenecks on your farm or areas that are labor sinks. So are there things that just are painfully slow on your farm? Are there things where they just don't get done without throwing a whole bunch of labor at them? An example might be transplanting by hand. And maybe at your scale, as you grow, it's time to consider a tractor-mounted transplanter. For vegetable growers, especially those at the beginning, it's easy to get excited about tractors and tillage equipment. In my opinion, the most important part of a vegetable farm is the back end of the farm. And by back end, I mean the harvesting and post-harvest handling and cold storage and things that are going to really lead to bringing income into your farm. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. In terms of setting priorities and making decisions, it's really, really important to visit other farms and talk to experienced growers. You can't do too much of that. It's always a good idea to talk to farms and visit as many farms as you can, either virtually through at a conference or in person. In general, it's better to buy bigger than you think you need right now. Obviously, there's you can go over the deep end with that, but you talk to any experienced vegetable grower and they'll tell you that there's a bunch of things that they've done on their farm that they almost immediately wish were bigger. You build a transplant greenhouse and you outgrow it in a couple years. You build a walk-in cooler and you outgrow it in a couple years. You pour cement for anything and you immediately wish you had a little bit more real estate. So good idea to buy as big as you can within your budget. When I started my farm, I had this naive notion that I had this list of equipment that I thought I needed for my farm to run efficiently. And I thought, well, after a few years of acquiring, and being able to afford the equipment, I'll be done, and then it'll just be smooth sailing. And the reality is that a farm really is never done capitalizing. Farms continue to change. They often continue to grow. They often continue to diversify. New equipment and machinery becomes available that didn't exist before. Things wear out, things break down. And the reason I learned this by doing a study of vegetable farms and their farm financial performance at different scales of production. And we had a bunch of different farms that we collected data from. And some of the farms were, maybe in their 5th year, and then we had vegetable farms that were in their 30th, or maybe even had more years under the belt than that. And everyone was continuing to capitalize because money spent on capitalization was one of the data points that we tracked. So your annual budget needs to include an amount that you set aside for purchasing new equipment and facilities. The study that I just mentioned is the study that's referenced here. And in our study, we found that on average, farms invest 10% of their gross sales into equipment or infrastructure over a 3-year period. And that was regardless of scale and regardless of how long they'd been farming. Where do we get that money? Many of us rely on savings or family. Increasingly, I feel like more and more growers are relying on loans and buying on terms. And then there's the notion of reinvesting in the farm or bootstrapping. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about bootstrapping. I'm a word nerd. And so when I started thinking about bootstrapping, I immediately went to my dictionary and learned that the term originated in the early 19th century, used in the phrase pull oneself over a fence by one's bootstraps. And it was meant to convey an absurdly impossible action. And then I got to learn a new word, and a dinaton is an absurdly impossible action. So, given that it's an absurdly impossible action, is that a good idea for a farm business to engage in? Or another thing that I found when I Googled bootstraps is fake it till you make it. Kind of like that one. So in terms of business definition of bootstrapping, bootstrapping is starting a business without external help or financing and funding the development of the farm business through internal cash flow. So the positives are that this allows an owner to maintain control over their business and not go into debt, and it forces them to spend with discipline. The downside is that bootstrapping can prolong those stages of business development and growth that are the most inefficient and frustrating. And when I first started getting involved in agriculture and I started attending conferences, I feel like every farmer that I heard give a presentation, they almost invariably said that one of the keys to what they were doing was that they had avoided debt like the plague. And I basically got the idea that debt was bad. And I really have sensed over time, I've been in this field now for 30 years, and I feel like that is really no longer the case. I don't hear as many farmers talking about avoiding debt like the plague, and that many farmers are using financing to advance their farm in effective ways. And here's another good example of bootstrapping. So we've got a bunch of things that we want to buy, and I would encourage everyone to do this kind of research. Talk to farmers, visit farms, and don't just stand there and look around, but ask lots of questions and try to gather as much data as you can when you interact with other farmers. Some of what you should ask is kind of basic context information so you can place their decisions and their equipment lineup in context. How many acres do they have in production if they're growing vegetables, or if it's livestock, what's their herd or flock size? What is their cropping and market mix? How many different crops? How many different markets? How complex is their operation? What facilities do they have? And not just, looking around and saying, oh, I see a machine shed over there. I see a shop. I see a wash pack shed, but what's going on in those buildings? What tools do they have in those buildings? What is the square footage of those buildings? And then find out the labor situation on the farm. Particularly how many full-time equivalents are involved in the operation. And, ask questions. Most farmers love to talk about equipment. What equipment do they use and what did it cost? Farmers love to brag about finding an implement at an auction and getting it for a song. Um, or sometimes they may even like to brag about how much they spent about something that's new to show off how maybe supposedly profitable their operation is. Ask what equipment had the most significant impact. What equipment could they not be without, or did they wish they'd bought earlier? Ask about maintenance issues and ongoing costs of operation, and then use that data to combine things into ratios. I love ratios. So, how many animals do they have per acre of pasture? How many cubic feet of storage space do they have per acre of vegetables? Um, how many square feet of transplant greenhouse space do they have per acre in vegetables? This can be really instructive, especially if you're just getting started out in terms of getting a handle on, well, how big of a greenhouse do I need? How many FTE do they have per acre? Really useful information. And the ratios that I just talked about are in the study that I referenced earlier, where I talked about how much money farmers tend to uh, plow back into the farm in terms of capitalization. That study resulted in a report called Farmer to Farmer, um, or sorry, Grower to Grower, making a livelihood on a fresh market vegetable farm. Um, it's a free PDF on our website. And I apologize for not including that link in my presentation, but I can provide that after the fact. It is a dated publication, but a lot of it is still relevant. All right, back to our Market Farm Madness bracket. This was the Sweet 16, down to 16 tools: the hoop house, the harvest knife, the sharpening hone for the harvest knife or anything else, some hoe, wheel hoe, scuffle hoe, the water wheel transplanter, the Alice Chalmers Model G tractor. Surprise to me, the CSA newsletter. I thought farmers all hated writing their CSA newsletter, but that made it to the Sweet 16. This was our Sweet 16. So we've got our list of tools, or I'm sorry, I'm a big list guy. So I encourage everyone to make lists. And if you're thinking about capitalizing your farm, you should make a list. You should list the things that you want, maybe a high cost and a low cost. That could either be new versus used, or it could be base model versus something with all the bells and whistles. You might want to consider the cost to rent or hire if that's possible. You can have a place to keep notes or to prioritize, or say, I want to do this in year 1 and this in year 3. And then in terms of making a list, I encourage you to think of categories on your farm. So what's going to be the power source on your farm? Maybe you're small scale and it's just going to be you. Maybe you're going to be relying on a 2-wheel walk behind tractor, or maybe it's a 4-wheel tractor, or maybe it's horses. And then there's tillage tools, cultivation tools, post-harvest tools, things for delivery. So think in terms of categories. It can help make sure that you do it accurately and systematically. If you're a livestock farm, your categories are going to be different. You've got manure handling and fencing and haymaking and getting water to your animals and moving animals around when it's time to sell them or buy them. And May, I am not able to monitor the chat while presenting. So if there's an urgent question or someone's trying to flag me, I don't mind being interrupted.
Okay, no problem.
So creating a farm capitalization budget. This might, this isn't necessarily my list when I started my farm, but I put up priority on the back end of my farm in terms of getting cold storage set up as early as possible. Some other things that basic things that you might need for growing vegetables: a market tent or an awning, a scale. You've got to be able to work the soil. You've got to be able to put seeds in the ground. Irrigation, super important to think about investing in as early as possible. And, all of that is really stuff that I really had to have in order to start selling. I didn't have to have a tractor right away. Spent a little time talking about new versus used versus rented or shared. Um, Renting and sharing it can be awkward, especially on specialty crop farms like vegetables or fruits, because the equipment is often so specialized that it's not really available to rent. And then there's also the issue of the activities that require that equipment being very time sensitive. And so, you can't wait. And so renting or sharing is often very challenging. Um, that said, I know many farms that relied on neighboring farmers to do custom tillage for them in the early years before they bought a tractor. And there are farms that, there are some farms that I know that are super, basically neighbors to each other, where it does sometimes become possible to share some equipment and infrastructure. Buying used is, of course, extremely common. And there are a ton of old equipment that are still, being used today, things that are 50, 60, maybe even 70 years old that are still being used on vegetable farms today, like the Allis-Chalmers Model G tractors. If you're buying used, it can take more time to find what you want in the condition that you want. So you might have to spend time doing a lot of looking, either online or going to auctions, or putting ads in on wanted lists or on Craigslist, what have you. Um, Important thing to think about is whether you have the ability to evaluate older or used equipment. If you don't, great idea is to find a retired farmer that can help you do that. And a lot of people love to go to auctions, even if they're not actively farming anymore, because they see their friends and they love farm equipment. So you might be able to find a mentor to help you with that process. With older equipment, it's important to consider the availability of parts and service, especially for tractors that where the manufacturer is not in business anymore. And then, of course, you have the trade-off between maybe a lower purchase price, but ongoing maintenance costs. The little chart over on the right is tiny and hard to see. The details aren't important, but that's accumulated repair costs for a two-wheel drive tractor over time. Time here being in hours. Most farm equipment is talked about in terms of hours rather than years of use. And so you have at 10,000 hours of use, the repair costs are 70% of the list price. So you need to think about that when you're buying used equipment. New is, of course, often a great option if you can afford it. There's often great financing that's offered. You might be able to get a warranty or a service plan. And then, of course, you have more modern features, whether that be safety features that didn't exist on older equipment, such as rollover protection, guards on things that are sharp, or just things like hydrostatic drive that allows a tractor to move really slow. Some of the older tractors go kind of too fast for some of the operations that a vegetable farm needs to do. All right, our Elite Eight was hoop houses versus harvest, the sharpening hone, harvest knives versus drip tape, the rotavator versus row cover, and gosh darn it, the CSA newsletter was still alive and it went up against spreadsheets. All right, making choices. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, talking to experienced growers about making choices, asking lots of questions, whether that to be to experienced growers or to dealers. With dealers, a good idea to ask about common repair and maintenance issues for things that they see over time. Make sure to ask if parts and service are readily available. And if it's a used piece of equipment, to understand something about how many hours and what it was used for. In terms of a tractor, it really depends on the type of work that that tractor was doing, not just the number of hours. For example, if a tractor was used for a lot of um, um, skid steer type work with a loader and a bucket, that can have more wear and tear on the tractor than other types of usage. I kind of already said this, but buying as much or as big as you can afford. The reason for that is when you settle for something less than what you really need, you're likely back in the marketplace pretty soon. It can be really hard to weigh or balance all your different priorities when your equipment list, your wish list is really long. I encourage you to prioritize those things that you think were going to have the biggest impact on operations, on making your operation more efficient. And I think it's also important to remember that you don't have to get hung up on this being a forever decision. Most things are easy to resell, and many things actually retain their value quite well. An example, especially if you take care of them, or maybe just if you take care of them, but some of the older tractors like the Alice G that I keep mentioning, they cost more now than they did when they were new, and they retain their value quite well. So don't be afraid to buy something. If it doesn't work out, chances are you'll be able to sell it to someone else. How to think about depreciation. I think most of us only think about depreciation when we're doing our taxes or where we're talking to our tax accountant. And it's really important to not think about depreciation just with your tax accountant hat on. Your tax accountant is going to want to depreciate things as quickly as possible, maybe even in the year that you bought it, to make you pay less tax, help you pay less tax. Depreciation is a non-cash expense, but it's a really good idea to include that in your annual budget to reflect the reality that things break down, they wear out, they may need extensive overhauls, or a building needs a new roof. They become outdated, or they just need to be replaced over time. And so you should treat depreciation, or whether you call it depreciation or capitalization budget or savings account for equipment, whatever you call it, it's money in your budget that you're setting aside to acquire needed tools and equipment and maintain those tools over time as your farm grows and changes. The basic calculation in terms of thinking about depreciation is the purchase price minus any resale value or salvage value divided by the years of useful life on your farm. And if that's for a new piece of equipment, for something that already exists on your farm, you can think about that piece of equipment's current value minus salvage or resale value divided by remaining years of useful life on your farm. So here's an example. We've got a $1,200 implement that we think we might be able to sell or salvage for $200, and we think it's going to last 10 years. And so that equals $100 a year. I just wanted to reference again this study where farms tended to invest 10%. 10% of their gross went to capitalization on average over a 3-year period. So if you have $1,500 in annual sales, you could consider having a $15,000 capitalization budget over a 3-year period. And that would really be a minimum. So, not to repeat myself too much, but I'm really big on telling vegetable growers that they should prioritize the back end of their farm operation. The most important thing that you have as a vegetable grower is your cold storage unit, where you get field heat out and you maintain ideal temperatures before you deliver that product to your customers. It's all about quality. It's not about harvested this morning and then taken to the farmer's market. It needs to be, you need to treat it as a professional produce purveyor, and you need cold storage. It doesn't have to be expensive. The CoolBot system is a pretty cheap and inexpensive way to get started with cold storage. It may not be ideal over the long term as your farm grows. So, and again, the reason we do this is that the biggest percentage of labor and expense on your farm is in the harvesting, washing, and packing. And making these tasks efficient and ensuring good quality is going to serve you in the long run in terms of boosting sales and profitability. Also, I would make note that farming involves moving a lot of heavy things around. whether it's potting mix or manure or the produce that you harvested itself or the T-posts that you haul out to the field to put up your trellis, or fertilizer. It's just there's all kinds of heavy things, and so investing with things with wheels is generally a good idea. This harvest cart that is in the corner here was the harvest cart that I used for many years. Brilliant design, all aluminum construction, super lightweight, but super sturdy and strong. And then another really happy day on my farm was when I actually had cement poured and was able to buy a pallet jack and move things around rather than carrying them. A lot of new growers fall into the trap of thinking that they're going to be able to get away with a two-wheel walk-behind tractor. And while that is possible, I also know a lot of farms that eventually realized that they weren't going to be able to meet their goals with a two-wheel tractor at that scale of production. And there's also just the reality that as you age, it's nice having four wheels rather than two. There's a lot of opportunities to buy weed cultivating tools, some of them quite expensive. My advice around weed cultivation is that timing is more important than the tool. Good tools usually pay for themselves, but being timely in terms of when you're getting rid of weeds is far more important than buying expensive tools to deal with weeds. The best time to get rid of weeds is at the thread cotyledon stage when they're very tiny. And good weed management leads to better harvests and more efficient harvesting. This is a photo from a farm I visited one time, and I was told that this was their field of tomatoes. Has anybody seen any tomatoes? Nothing slows down harvest than having to try to find the crop. A myth that I like to dispel is that hiring labor or mechanizing are not mutually exclusive options. You can't really kind of just decide that you don't like working with people and you don't like managing people, so you're not going to hire anyone. You're just going to mechanize. I mean, maybe we'll eventually have affordable vegetable picking robots, but I don't think that's going to happen super soon, especially if the affordable part of that is the important bit. So you're going to need workers, whether you start mechanizing or not. Irrigation. I mentioned that I was going to say something about that. When you consider that most vegetables are 90% water, so when you sell vegetables, you're basically selling flavored, textured, nutritious water holding vessels. And so counting on Mother Nature to provide water for your crop needs is really not good risk management. And if you're going to have healthy crops, water is a key element in having healthy, nutritious crops. So invest in irrigation. And that's not, well, unless you're having to dig a well, most of what you need to invest in irrigation is not necessarily that expensive. There are affordable options. I want to note that mid-size farms can be tricky in terms of equipment and tricky to capitalize. It's because when you start entering what might be considered a middle-size scale, whether that be, I don't know, 7, 10 acres, perhaps, you kind of start needing larger scale equipment, but you might not be growing on enough acres to make that equipment pay for itself, or have the return on investment be what you might like to see. So middle-sized farms can be a little tricky. That being said, I know plenty of farms that are farming at that kind of scale and are making it work. They just need to really think carefully about the tools that they buy and do that in a savvy way over time. This isn't really tools and equipment, but in today's day and age, it really makes sense to spend money on business management systems and software and apps that can really make a difference in terms of your farm operation being effective and efficient. And then, as a general rule, if you need something, tell the world. And what I mean by that is the more people you tell that you need something, the more likely it is that you're going to find it and that you're going to find it in a way that works for you at a price that you can afford. Maybe someone will just give you something. It's one of the best pieces of advice that a farmer mentor of mine gave me when I started my farm was, and she did this routinely. She would tell everyone what she needed, what she was looking for. Final four. Or I'm sorry, I skipped the final four. Oh no, this was our final four. Harvest Knife beat Hoop House, and Spreadsheets beat Rotavator. This slide is a cue for me to switch over to a different presentation. So I apologize. My other presentation is in widescreen mode, so I couldn't lump them in together. How am I doing on time, May?
Um, we have 5 minutes,
Oh my.
but we also started late because of my mishap.
All right.
Um,
Well,
so I don't know.
I'm gonna try to buy 5 or 10 minutes then since we got started late.
Okay.
I'm going to briefly mention a tool that I've been working on with folks at the University of Vermont. It's going to be posted on the Farm Labor Dashboard. It doesn't exist there yet, but we're calling it an equipment cost recovery analysis tool. And it's designed to answer the question, if I buy this, how quickly will it pay for itself in terms of reduced costs, mainly reduced labor costs? It's a spreadsheet tool that will be downloadable, and also there'll be an online version at the Farm Labor Dashboard website run by the University of Vermont. It goes through this depreciation calculation, and then asks you about whether that equipment's going to help you sell more vegetables. It asks about what your gross margin is on your farm to account for that. Again, I'm going to run this through this quick because of time. We bring the annual depreciation amount from above. There's a interest calculator tool if you're buying something and taking a loan out for it. There's a way to figure out what the total cost will be for that equipment, including the loan and interest. And then we ask about operating expenses that might increase because of this piece of equipment, or operating expenses that might decrease because of this equipment. And then there's a special section about decreased labor expenses and a separate page where we walk you through a process of thinking about how much time this new piece of equipment is going to save you in terms of sending hired workers out to transplant or harvest or do wash and pack things in the greenhouse. And so you end up in the end, those are examples of the labor cost calculator. This example is for a water wheel transplanter, I believe. And based on the numbers that we put in, we calculated that it was going to pay for itself in less than a year and a half. So that tool is going to be available coming soon. And I'm going to jump back over to my other presentation. Sorry that was really rushed. So, any guesses on the favorite tool from the 2017 Market Farm Madness tournament? It, lo and behold, was spreadsheets, which was near and dear to my heart because I'm a hopeless spreadsheet geek. It's mainly one of the main things I do is build spreadsheet tools to help farmers. So it was really gratifying. Some people did accuse me of manipulating the results, but I promise you that I did not. So I promised that I was going to end with the 4 foolproof steps to a profitable, satisfying farm business. They are: number 1, start keeping records. Number 2, keep keeping records. We often have to do 3. We have to restart keeping records because we failed. And you got to pick one of those. If you're not keeping records, you're not going to know what is happening on your farm, and you're not going to be able to make database decisions to improve things over time, including the purchase of equipment and building infrastructure to make your farm more profitable and enjoyable. Uh, Quick plug for Veggie Compass. Veggie Compass is a free downloadable spreadsheet tool that calculates profitability by crop and market channel. Um, there are there's a user guide. There are videos on YouTube that explain how to use this tool. We do have a new version coming out very soon. The new version actually is what you're seeing here. It's not actually quite available yet, but it will be soon. We also have a livestock compass, which is designed to help a diversified livestock producer measure profitability across their different species and market channels. And then we have a brand new beef enterprise calculator that focuses on the different phases of beef production, cow calf, stocker, and finishing. Cow calf, stocker, finishing. And here is my email address if you want to contact me afterwards. I am always happy to answer questions and engage with people, whether you are a Wisconsin farmer or not. So don't be bashful, even though I'm way out here in Wisconsin.
I appreciate you offering up your email for people's questions here. That's really cool. I did ask people in the chat what they were growing or producing. So we do have root vegetables, bees, dairy, beef, hogs, poultry, cannabis, eggs, chickens, veggies, small farmstead with cow and sheep for a creamery, cut flowers. And that's the people who are here.
Great. Kendall, I like your add-on quote to record keeping. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. That's exactly my point.
I stole that from a professor at University of Rhode Island.
Well, I stole my list of four foolproof things from a farmer, from a flower farmer who kept amazing records. And as a result, he was a very good flower farmer.
Do we have any questions for John?
Hazel, I see that you custom hire for tilling and share cold storage. Yeah, cold storage is another one where if you're close by another farm, that can be, um, might not be something that you want to do long term, but as a stopgap measure, I have one of my best friends had a farm up north, and they shared a cold storage uh, walk-in cooler with another neighboring farm that was maybe 5 miles away for many, many years.
Exactly. And that's kind of, and we kind of like even planned for the funding of that together. We're really new. This is like season 4, 3.5, something like that, that we're going into. But we're just, this season, we're really just focusing on closing on the property. That seems to be the big priority now. The last couple of seasons, we did some small sales. We kind of had the model with you. We just sold to distributors. It's really my adult children and myself, and we were all working off farm. And
Mhm.
I was retired the first 3 years, but I was back at work, and it was just easier for us to continue to do what we love, which is the planting and the growing and just being there. We're probably more lifestyle farmers in that sense and community farmers. We give and donate a lot of food,
Mhm.
mostly. But, we were able to do something with Intervale and CAE, just very small, 100 pounds of this or something like that. And, but we're trying to uh, take a more serious approach. So we're restarting records. I've maintained really good records, but I think we're in number 3 at this point right now. everything we're just going to improve and progress. Yeah, we're just in that growth phase, I would say describes us. So the cooler situation is just for a couple of years because we really don't grow as much even as our partner farm. But it
Yeah.
is helpful to have that tool because that's a tool we didn't have the first few years. So that was always kind of like a little bit of a struggle for us. It's a
Okay.
lot. And I appreciate the statistics you showed about earnings. That was
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
uh,
It's important to know that context. And I feel like a lot of small farmers get kind of bad mouth that, you can't be full time as a small scale farmer. Well, the reality is that even the large farms aren't making a living without off farm income. Or, in many cases, the off farm income is to acquire reasonable health insurance. So it's all part of that equation. I see some other questions and comments that I want to make sure to get to. Um, Kendall, you bring up a really good point about sanitation and cross contamination if you're sharing cold storage. Certainly if you are a larger farm selling wholesale to accounts that require uh, that you follow food safety, strict food safety rules and regulations, that's not going to be a good option to share cold storage space. If you're small scale and you're making do with this temporarily until you can afford some cold storage of your own, that would really put some limits around what is possible there. Sam, you're asking about buying versus making hay. That's a really key question for anyone raising livestock, as I obviously that by asking that question. The tools that we've created can help answer that question. It's all, I can't answer that question for you because it depends on how much it costs you to make hay. And it also depends on what the cost of hay is. Of course, the cost of hay can vary from year to year. I certainly know I know farms here in Wisconsin. We're the dairy state, and so there's lots of hay being grown. So if you're in a place where there's lots of hay, buying it can be a good option, depending on the scale of your operation and how much hay you need versus how much you're grazing.
Do you have any calculators or compasses specific to haying equipment comparing with cost of feed to kind of help make that analysis? Or
That's embedded in specifically, are you raising beef or
yeah, dairy and beef.
dairy and beef? We haven't built a tool. We haven't built a dairy tool yet. We've got one on the back burner that's been there for a while. So putting hay into cows and then selling the milk is, another layer of financial complexity that we haven't dealt with in terms of the Compass tools. But the Beef Enterprise tool, it doesn't have like a separate calculator just for what does it cost me to. Well, I mean, it's there. It's kind of embedded in the tool. I would encourage you to take a look at that tool. That tool is available. Here, let me post the URL.
Those are on the CIAS website, I would imagine.
They are. I'll pop the URL
Cool.
where all those tools are located here into the chat.
I'm also going to share with you all the resources that have been mentioned today and some extra ones. And I also want to mention that there's farm business planning services in Vermont. And I will include the contact of the person who could help you find the right program or business advisor who can help you like sit down and look at your numbers and like figure what makes sense for your farm.
Other questions?
Thanks a lot, John. I happen to be a UW-Madison grad, and took a lot of BSc classes there. It's a really awesome program. So thanks for the work you're doing. And yeah, it's a cool
Thank,
state and a really cool program.
thank you. The second URL I just added in is a direct link to that grower to grower study that I referenced. It is dated. The data from those farms was collected back in the early 2000s. So, we collected information about how much money people were making per acre, and those numbers are all higher now. So, but there's some nuggets in that publication. Like we asked people how many square feet of greenhouse space they had per acre of vegetables and how many cubic feet of cold storage space they had per acre of vegetables. And so if you're a vegetable grower, those are interesting numbers to look at as you're building infrastructure on your farm. And then some of the realities around, net to gross percentages. While people's gross sales per acre have gone up, so have costs per acre. And so some of the net to gross figures are still certainly relevant that are in that publication. That publication is exclusively oriented to vegetables, so don't have the equivalent for livestock producers.
Does anyone have any more questions?
I had one. I was just wondering, you had mentioned go out and talk to farmers. Did you have a forum or places that you were like, this was actually the place that I should have gone to talk to them in the first place? And it was almost making me wonder when you mentioned sales and stuff for tractors, and that is like our auctions and talking to that old guy down the street, like a good option, or that old guy eyeing the Alice Chalmers, the option that you want to go for.
Yeah, it certainly can be. I mean, I think the way a lot of people start, I started going to the big organic farming conference that we have in Wisconsin annually. Used to be called the Moses Organic Conference. Moses was an acronym for an organization. It's now called the Marble Seed Conference. They changed their name. So, you go to conferences, you start meeting people. If they're close by, they might invite you to come over and see their operation. There are organizations that conduct farm tours for beginning farmers. So I took advantage of those. I got involved in a farmer-owned marketing cooperative. And so I was talking with other producers and learned a ton from the other producers in that organization while it lasted. So, it's all about networking, and, not being bashful. That can be uncomfortable depending on who you are and how outgoing you are, but it's also if you're at a stage in your life where you can go out and work on a bunch of farms, that's another way to see farms. And I certainly did a bit of that. I worked on 2 farms before I started my own farm.
I think maybe most of you are also familiar with the vegetable and berry growers listserv, which is also a really great resource to ask any questions about your operation.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of listservs. I mentioned that market farming listserv that used to exist. That was a nationwide listserv that was it went away, unfortunately. Right now out here we have an organization called FairShare, which is an organization that kind of coordinates outreach and promotion of community supported agriculture. And they have a really great listserv where people post all kinds of questions in season or out of season. It's, the listserv is quieter during the peak of the summer, but and I know that there are Facebook groups too. I'm not a social media person. I avoid it like the plague. Personal choice.
Again, any more questions for John or your fellow farmers?
I don't know what your intentions were, but I am happy to share my slides if folks would find them useful as a PDF.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Anything helps. Well, thanks again for presenting and giving us some of your time.
You bet.
If no one else has any questions, I think we can call it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Excellent way to start the season.
Yeah, good start.